Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. The following is another collection of 3 gripping tales of the supernatural, anchored by the ominous Ouija board. From William's haunting encounter with an ancient spirit, Laura and Alex's terrifying brush with a malevolent watcher, to Emily's nightmarish experience at a harmless sleepover, each story presents a stark warning about the catastrophic consequences of prying in the mysterious realm of the Ouija board. From bad to worse. In many instances, resorting to a Ouija board only amplifies an already existing supernatural issue. People often falsely believe that the Ouija will guide them to the root of the unidentified, inexplicable events haunting them. Yet these positive intentions frequently get distorted by not-so-friendly spirits, leading to less than favourable consequences. The following situation is a pertinent illustration of this. University student Dan was thrilled when he discovered an intriguing magician's cloak at an antiquities shop. Searching for a Halloween costume, he quickly pictured himself donning that cloak at future parties on campus. The shopkeeper guaranteed Dan that the cloak was an original, ritualistic garment over a century old, presenting him with a deal too tempting to reject. Upon returning to his dormitory, Dan stored the cloak in his wardrobe, safe and secure until Halloween. However, that night at around 2 a.m, loud clattering and banging noises disrupted the roommates' sleep. They dashed to the kitchen only to see an unbelievable sight. All the cupboard doors were flung open, their contents scattered all over the floor. Not a single cooking utensil was in its designated place. Baffled, the young men had no explanation for the inexplicable occurrence. Given the late hour and upcoming early morning classes, they dismissed it as best they could and went back to sleep. In the subsequent days and nights, a series of peculiar incidents unfolded. Lights flickered on and off randomly, water taps were found running in the absence of anyone to turn them on, rooms were vandalised, and the shattering of glass became a regular nocturnal noise. Suspecting a ghostly presence, the roommates decided to attempt to communicate with it to make it leave. They opted for a Ouija board as their instrument of communication. Procuring a board from a thrift shop, the young men patiently waited until sundown, then congregated around the kitchen table where the board was positioned. Their first query was, "Is anyone here?" Gradually, the planchette shifted to yes. Next, they asked for a name, but it only resulted in the pointer aimlessly moving around the board before halting on a meaningless sequence of consonants. "Are you the one causing disturbances?" one of the men inquired. The answer was yes. Finally, they questioned, "Will you leave?" This time, the pointer bypassed both yes and no, resting on goodbye, thus conclusively terminating the session. Far from alleviating their spectral issue, the Ouija board encounter appeared to amplify their predicament, commencing that very night. Thunderous thumps echoed through the walls, cries akin to catfights permeated the air, and an overall stifling sensation descended heavily upon the dormitory. At a loss, they resolved to disregard the eerie occurrences, hoping they would dissipate on their own. Soon it was time for Dan to attend his first Halloween party, a much-needed distraction from the pandemonium at the dorm. As he donned his newly acquired cloak, he felt a sudden chill, despite the cloak being crafted from thick felted wool. At the party, he felt peculiarly detached from everything. He was aware of people conversing with him, yet their voices seemed distant. What was most unsettling, though, were the visions that transported him to a distant location. He envisioned himself in a dimly lit edifice, illuminated only by torches and candles. He stood amidst a circle of men, cloaked in robes similar to his, chanting and enacting a peculiar ritual. Disturbed and exhausted by these odd sensations, Dan cut his party attendance short. Attributing the previous night's experiences to his overactive imagination, which he thought had been fueled by the strange dormitory events, Dan attended another Halloween party the subsequent evening. However, the moment he slipped into the cloak, he was overwhelmed by a bone-chilling sensation. The visions recurred, this time more potent and lucid. He left that party prematurely as well. Upon returning to the dorm and discarding his cloak, the uncomfortable sensation promptly dissipated. It was then that Dan finally linked the cloak to the plethora of odd and inexplicable occurrences. Sharing his findings with his parents, they connected him with a priest and paranormal investigator and demonologist, John Zaffis. Zaffis obtained the cloak from Dan, confirming that it was indeed a genuine occult ritual cloak, imbued with both human and spirit energy. The spirit energy, he explained, was inherently dark, and by utilising the Ouija board, the young men had unwittingly amplified its destructive capabilities, granting it a more formidable presence in their lives, particularly in Dan's case. However, a positive turn of events transpired swiftly. The moment the cloak was removed and blessings were bestowed upon Dan and the dormitory, there were no further incidents of any supernatural disturbance for Dan or his roommates. The infamous cloak, along with the Ouija board they had used on that unforgettable night, are now housed in Zaffis's Museum of the Paranormal, securely bound and drained of their energies. Should have stayed home. Now in her 30s, Terry is still haunted by a horrifying incident that occurred on a balmy summer night in Ohio when she was only 9. The incident, again, involved a Ouija board. Terry's elder sister Jill and Jill's friend Christine were looking after Terry when they decided to dabble with the Ouija board that Jill had discreetly kept away from their mother's scrutiny. Earlier, Terry and Jill's mother had sternly admonished the older girls against using the board and had even ordered them to dispose of it. She wrongly presumed they had complied with her instruction. The girls set up the board in a dimly lit closet, the faint glow coming from a few candles. Terry recalls numerous questions being posed, culminating in a name and an address received through the board. The next thing she knew, her sister was hastily packing things, shoving shoes onto Terry's feet and hurrying them towards the car. The lateness of the hour, the darkness, and her sister's unnaturally hurried actions all served to instill fear in young Terry. Eventually, the car halted. The girls had arrived at the address provided by the Ouija board. It was a graveyard. Apparently unperturbed, or at least not expressing their concern, Jill and Christine navigated through the cemetery until they found a gravestone bearing the name they sought. There, they re-established the setup with the Ouija board and candles and continued to pose questions to the ethereal realm. Terry settled next to a neighbouring gravestone, patiently awaiting the older girl's conclusion. Soon, Terry heard a sharp intake of breath from Christina in response to a message from the board. In that instant, all the surrounding candles were extinguished. However, the lunar glow provided enough light for them to witness a sight they would never erase from their minds. The countenance of a nearby angel statue had spun around to stare directly at them. The face was spectral white, with hollow eyes and a gaping dark mouth. Terror gripped Terry at the sight of the ghastly face, rendering her momentarily paralysed. Yet the echoing screams of the other girls shattered her frozen state, prompting her to spring up and dash towards the car, closely tailing Jill and Christine. Decades later, Terry's aunt stunned her by revealing her own encounter with the same horrifying pale face when she was a teenager. It had first manifested in her bedroom window, appearing multiple times in varying locations. It was only after her baptism in young adulthood that the apparitions of the face ceased. Though Terry hasn't encountered the face since that chilling night in the cemetery, its memory has plagued her. This has led her to scour the internet in an attempt to find an image of it or a story mirroring her own, ideally accompanied by an explanation. Yet she recognises that an explanation will most likely continue to elude her, at least in this lifetime. Opening the wrong door. Life had become a struggle for Sarah, her two younger siblings and their mother since the death of Sarah's father in 2008. It was thus a delightful surprise when Sarah's mum acquiesced to her daughter's persistent request to purchase the last Ouija board on the store shelf in the summer of 2010. Filled with unrestrained excitement, Sarah darted to the dining table upon reaching home and arranged the board. She had barely touched the planchette, preparing to inquire about the presence of any spirits, when a thunderous crash resounded from the garage. The noise startled her to such an extent that she almost knocked the planchette off the board. Leaving it there, she and her mother set off to inspect the source of the noise. It was immediately evident what had provoked the uproar in the garage. An old Budweiser clock, cherished by Sarah's father, had slipped from its hook. The incident was unusual in itself, given there was no discernible reason for its abrupt fall. Yet what was even more peculiar was that the clock was lying on the floor on the side opposite to where it had been hung. It appeared as if someone had hurled it across the garage, but there were no scratches or other signs of damage on it. Muttering "strange" under her breath, Sarah's mother rehung the clock, while Sarah returned inside to continue her Ouija board session. However, another surprise awaited Sarah. The planchette, which she distinctly remembered leaving haphazardly in a corner, had somehow been perfectly realigned at the centre of the board. This unnerved Sarah sufficiently to prompt her to pack away the Ouija board and stash it in a closet. A few days later, Sarah's mother was on the front porch, cradling Sarah's infant sister and chatting with a neighbour. It was a bright, warm morning without a hint of breeze. Suddenly, a hanging plant at the far end of the porch catapulted off its hook and landed at Sarah's mother's feet, startling everyone present. Several months later, just after Halloween, Sarah invited two of her friends, Lucy and Anita, for a sleepover. The girls decided to watch a movie, and Sarah loaded up a DVD and flicked off the bedroom light. As soon as the room plunged into darkness, Lucy and Anita let out horrifying screams. Sarah promptly switched the lamp back on and saw her two friends in tears clinging to each other. When she questioned them about their reaction, the girls claimed they had seen a tall, shadowy figure resembling a man with an extraordinarily long neck standing before the closet. Petrified, they returned to their homes and vowed never to set foot in Sarah's bedroom again. Sarah has shared that numerous other inexplicable occurrences have transpired in her home ever since the Ouija board was brought there. She often hears the sounds of whispers and footsteps when there's nobody around, experiences unsettling dreams, and regularly gets the sensation of being watched, even when she's alone. Sarah is convinced that her single interaction with the board opened a gateway to another realm, a realm she'd prefer to keep distant from her own.